These days, in the current dispensation, burials are performed in different ways. And burial ceremony is a ritual that is commonly practiced by all cultures, but different cultures perform this burial in different ways. Certain ways are related to certain culture, and this burial ritual is done from one generation to another generation, which eventually becomes a tradition by those cultures. Hello everyone, welcome back to Breakage Barriers. My name is Blessing. I'm also known as Lady B. By the way, burial practice is a ritual that is essential in that death is one of the rites of passages. So we have different rites of passages practiced by every culture. Therefore, in the ancient African culture, there are 5 types of rites of passage. These rites of passages are important evolutions that takes place in a person's life. And these passages only happens once in that person's life. So in the ancient African culture, these rites of passages are so essential that rituals have to be performed because they happen once in that person's life. So these are quite important to the belief of the African spiritual practices in the African culture by the performance of rituals through sacrifices, because it is believed that the earth is got to be compensated or gifted in thanksgiving that a person lives to pass through these once in a lifetime experiences. So the earth is gifted in thanksgiving, and that's how the African culture is. The African culture is full of thanksgiving. There's thanksgiving for being bettered, there's thanksgiving for being married, there's thanksgiving for attaining a certain limelight in life. So these are extra important experiences to the African spirituality. So there are 5 types of rites that are celebrated in the African culture. First is the right to birth. Second is the right to puberty. Third is the right to marriage. Fourth is the right to eldership. Eldership in terms of becoming an elder in the community. And fifth is the right to ancestorship. All these rites are marked with celebration through the performance of rituals in the African culture. But today we'll be talking about how burial is performed in the African culture. Before we do that, I would like to state that there are different types of burial around the world, but I'll be stating 4 types of burial. The list is endless though. This is not specific to the African culture, but the general culture of the world. The first one is cremation. Second is cryopreservation. The third type of burial is reshumation. This involves using an alkali to preserve the body of the dead person. And the least, but not the last, is the traditional type of burial. That's the fourth one, is the one that is common to the African culture. That's the traditional type of burial whereby when a person dies, the person is buried under the ground or under the earth, because the African culture believes that humans are from the earth, and to the earth human returns. It's a spiritual belief which the African culture teaches that we come from the earth and we return back to the earth. And this concept is what is written in the Christian Bible. And when you look at the Old Testament of the Christian Bible, when you really look deep into the Old Testament of the Christian Bible, you will know that that story there in the Old Testament, I'm not talking about the New Testament right now, I'm talking about the Old Testament. Most of it is the narrative detailing the African culture. But this we will talk at a later time in the future. Let's focus on this now. Albeit the traditional type of burial performed in the African culture is performed in several ways depending on the part of Africa that you come from, but it ends up the same way of the deceased being buried in the ground. In some of the African culture, the skin of an animal, as in the skin, is used to cover the deceased in the coffin. And in some, the deceased is cleaned up, clothed, and embalmed, depending on what the deceased requested for before death. Is embalmed and buried in the ground. And before the deceased is buried in the ground, rituals have to be performed, and these rituals are performed by the slaughtering of animals. These animals have to be the spotless type of animals. When I say spotless, I mean without blemish. Must be without defect. These animals are usually in the range of a sheep, a goat, a lamb, cows, and pigs, depending on that particular culture in Africa. These animals are slaughtered, and the blood from the animals are sprinkled all over the ground. Sometimes where the deceased is going to be buried, sometimes at the deceased home, sometimes just on the open road. I remember when I was younger and I used to see this, I used to wonder, why are they doing this? Why are they doing this? But now that I'm older, I know much. Not just older, but older and have knowledge of why these are performed. If you are still in that place that I used to be, let me enlighten you. This blood from the lamb are sprinkled on the ground with the belief that this blood is more like compensatory into the earth. So the blood is a ceremonial way of thanksgiving and gifts back to the earth. And even the Bible attests in the Old Testament to this practice. It's only in the New Testament that you don't find this, because the New Testament does not carry the true and correct tradition of Africa and the African culture. So when next you see this, there's nothing to fear. When these animals are sacrificed as rituals, the interest of the community is taken into consideration as well, because these animals are not just sacrificed and thrown away, but they are sacrificed after the sprinkling of the blood, prayers, incantations, calling of the name of the deceased, and giving thanksgiving and glory to the Creator who has given the deceased life and time to live here on earth. After all this ritual is performed, with the gathering of family members, friends, and the community at large, these animals are then slaughtered and shared amongst the community in participation of thanksgiving to the Creator who has given the deceased the life to live here on earth. So the dead are not just buried within the family members alone. The community is involved, because in the African culture, community is of importance. We do things as a family, not just within the nuclear family, but the extended family, cousins, far cousins, aunties and uncles, and even members of the community that are unknown to the family members. So in Africa, the practice is communal. That's the basis of relationship in the African culture, which is part of the African spirituality as well. Also, as the burial is ongoing, I don't know if you lot have seen some parts of African burial taking place where you see the coffin carried by 4 or 6 men, and it's being tossed by these 4 or 6 men up and down. It's a traditional practice in the African culture in celebration of the life that the deceased lived. Again, I say in Africa, we are always full of gratitude. We are in gratitude of life. We are in gratitude of just being alive, really. The culture is immersed in gratitude. This is symbolic of the life the person has lived as being victorious. In addition, there are certain parts of the African culture, in fact, most, if not all of the African culture, whereby professional mourners are called to mourn over the deceased. This is symbolic of the pain the family members are feeling for the loss of a loved one. It's symbolic of the bereavement the family members are feeling. As these members of the family are crying, these so-called professional criers are gathered around the family members and are wailing in pain. Some of them throw themselves on the ground just to show the extent at which the family member bereavement is. So it's not like some other cultures where burial is taking place and you see them all heads down and showing little or no sign of bereavement. In the African culture, we show how we feel. We show the extent of the pain the bereavement is causing us physically. So we don't sugarcoat it, we don't hide it, nothing like that. We show our emotions. The professional criers are hired to show the extent of our emotions, how deep it is, how painful it is, how downcast it's made the family members to feel. I didn't know this many years ago until recently. To the last point, which is quite important as well, while this burial is being performed, depending on how the family members want to express this, libation is done. If you've listened to some of my previous video, I did explain what libation is all about. This is the pouring of wine or water, depending on the affordability of the family. They either use water or wine. Pour it on the ground where the deceased is buried or at the home of the deceased, wherever the deceased is buried. So how this is done is that this wine or water is poured on the ground, that's again the earth. This is symbolic of the spirituality that the African culture carries. We are very earthy people, which is a form of connecting to the earth. So this water or wine is poured again to the earth or ground in thanksgiving for the life the deceased has lived. So while this wine is being poured to the earth or ground, the name of the deceased is called. While the deceased name is called, the water or wine is being poured to the ground, and then prayer is offered. So prayer can be offered in thanksgiving, in gratitude, in the request for guidance for the family members who are still here on earth. So overall, this is done in honor, in homage to the deceased. Hence, the African burial ceremony is all involved in gratitude, homage, and spirituality. The African culture is a spiritual culture. Thank you very much for watching and listening again. Hope to see you in the next one. Take care now.